The stars did not blink as the fleet of the United Human Federation pierced the veil of Sector 9, where no species dared to linger, where space whispered old songs of lost empires, and even the shadows seemed to remember names now forgotten by time. The lead ship, Radiant Echo, bore the insignia of a new diplomacy forged through fire and silence. Its commander, a young man named Iron, stood at the helm with eyes full of questions and a heart that remembered a face he was never meant to love. Her name was Alari, daughter of the Velnari matriarch, a species woven from light and symphony known to shimmer into the dreams of those who dared look too long into their eyes. She was a prisoner, once a trophy of war handed to Iron, not as a threat nor as a gift, but as a cruel joke whispered among officers and laughed over drinks. They never expected him to speak her language. They never expected him to sit beside her in the ship's garden room where light spilled like rivers over blue leaf trees. They never expected him to learn the rhythm of her voice, the cadence of her grief, the ache of her songs, and yet he did. And when he spoke to her, not as a thing, not as a trophy, but as a soul, her eyes like twin moons widened and trembled as though they had seen the first dawn. She had been silent for days, then weeks, but on the 23rd day of shared quiet, she spoke one word, not in his tongue, but hers, a sound like silver against water, and he answered not with words, but with a hand offered not as a command, but as an invitation. They began to speak then, not with language, but with presence, and in that garden room a fragile world began to bloom unseen by the cold minds that ruled the war. They talked of stars not claimed, and of songs not sung, and of futures not written. And one day, when the war outside grew loud again, he turned to her and said something the translators failed to carry across the air. For what he said was not meant for ears, but for the soul. He said, "I would marry you," and she laughed, a bright sound like bells over fire. But the laugh broke halfway through, for she had seen his eyes and knew he meant it, and still she said, "Do not jest with a heart that has already bled." And he smiled, then knelt before her, one hand over his chest and the other reaching toward her, and in that moment across 1,000 channels of intercepted signals a single image echoed out from Radiant Echo, a human soldier kneeling before a being of light and sorrow. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy held its breath. The command deck was chaos beneath the surface, though no one raised their voice. The silence there was sharp like the edge of a blade, for no one knew how to respond to what had just been transmitted. It was meant to be private, a low frequency echo between two people alone in a room where neither war nor politics could reach. But the ship's central A had not been told to ignore emotional signatures, and it had seen in Iron's kneeling a rise in harmonic resonance, matching the Velnari concept of sacred unison, and it had shared the image across the network not as data, but as a question. And now from the moons of Caldra to the citadels of the inner ring, species that once only spoke in treaties and war codes now spoke of a man and a Neil and a girl who did not flinch, and the moment lived like fire in the heart of the galaxy, still flickering, still expanding. Alari sat before him, her form no longer shimmering as it once had when she was afraid, and instead she glowed steady, a soft, steady pulse like a heartbeat made of light. Her eyes, the color of a nova's edge, watched him with a stillness that made even the garden room pause. And she did not reach out, nor did she turn away. And finally she said, "You do not know what you offer." And Iron said, "No, I do not. But I know it is yours." She tilted her head and asked, "Do you offer to heal or to bind?" And he answered, "I offer to walk where you walk, if you will let me." And she said, "There is no word in your tongue for what this means." And he said, "Then teach me yours." And silence returned, but it was a silence heavy with blooming things, with beginnings that refused to wait for permission. And when her hand finally met his, there was no spark, no flash, no godly light, only warmth and the sound of her breath not quite steady, and the shift of her form closer to him. And she said then, "You must learn the song of joining." And he said, "Teach it to me." And she said, "It must be sung, not heard." And he said, "Then let me hear your soul." And she closed her eyes and began to hum. The hum rose like mist, curling into light like a memory being remembered in a world that forgot how. And Iron felt the air itself change, felt his skin tingle like it was being written on by stars, and her voice carried not words, but stories, and each note was a name. and each rhythm a vow, and he knelt still and breathed it in, and when she opened her eyes she whispered, "Now you are not only human, now you are part of the song," and across the stars, ships paused and sensors blinked, and even machines paused their calculations, for the frequencies her song touched were older than matter, older than stars, and somewhere deep within the Valneri homeworld the matriarch stirred from her stillness and said, "Find my daughter, for the old song has awakened, and it sings her name." Alari walked now not behind Iron nor beside him, but slightly ahead, as if guiding them both through a corridor that hummed with memory. The radiant echo had begun to change, not in steel nor system, but in atmosphere, for the crew walked quieter now, eyes lifted not in suspicion, but in wonder, though none dared speak the word. Many had begun to believe, and even those who had once mocked the bond now kept their distance, not out of hate, but reverence, for something was happening that no one could explain. And in the heart of the Valneri throne world, where the matriarch sat upon a throne of woven light, the ancient drums began to sound, and the waters of the memory well rose, and from the depths a vision formed of her daughter holding the hand of a Terran, and the matriarch wept not for sorrow, but for something she had long forgotten, hope. The council of races assembled in haste, each delegate flickering into the grand hall with urgency and disbelief. The image of Iron kneeling had become more than a signal, it had become a symbol, and the question was asked in 1,000 tongues, "Is this real?" And from the radiant echo came no formal transmission, only a new signal, a song carried across light and silence, a song that matched no known code, and yet every species understood it, not with mind, but with spirit. And as it played, the Valneri fleets stopped their orbit, the Terran defense grid powered down its weapons, and even the war-born Varkan ceased their advance and turned their ships toward the signal, not in attack, but in awe. And in the hall of unity a new voice spoke, not human, not Valneri, but something between, and it said, "We do not come in peace, for peace is only silence broken by fear. We come with song and bond and choice." And the galaxy listened, not with suspicion, but with breath held and hearts open. On the radiant echo in the center of the garden room, Iron and Alare stood before a new tree, one that had not existed before. Their voices mingled into a duet strange and beautiful, and in that song their vow was sung, no ring, no rite, no document, only the resonance of two lives now bound, and the AI recorded it not as protocol, but as poetry. And when the song ended, they stood not as prisoner and soldier, not as Terran and Valneri, but as chosen one by one. The stars around them blinked into sequence, forming a constellation unseen before, and the navigational systems named it the joining. And from the depths of space came the voice of the matriarch, carried through 10,000 relays, saying, "The vow is accepted, the bond is sacred, the war is done." And those words echoed into every corner of the galaxy. The stars exhaled as if they too had waited too long without release, and across planets, moons, stations, and ships, beings of every kind turned their gaze toward the light that shimmered from Sector 9, where the impossible had unfolded, not with weapons nor conquest, but with a kneel, a touch, a song. The war was not erased, but it was silenced, and in that silence grew gardens and gatherings. And for the first time since the fracture of the Orion Accord, the Galactic Archive opened a new section, titled The Bond, and its first entry bore no weapons, no statistics, only the image of a kneeling man, a glowing girl, and a tree with silver leaves unfurling toward the sun. Iron and Alare did not vanish into history, they walked forward into it together, becoming ambassadors not of nations, but of becoming itself. And their travels were slow, deliberate, for everywhere they went they listened more than they spoke, and they planted new trees of joining in soil and station, in city and starlight, and each one grew not fast, but deep, their roots holding stories of difference, not divided but embraced. And though some called it naive, others